introduce Alex Bronstein from WSC in Palo Alto. And Alex has spent I guess, about 9 months doing the first port of NT to a MIPS box at Microsoft. And so this is the first port of NT to any MIPS hardware other than that designed by Microsoft. And he's lived quite a while, a few offices away from, let's say within shouting distance of Dave Cutler. I think he has a lot of stories to tell about NT. And here he is.
Thank you.
One comment. The library is collecting articles on NT, and we'll have a set of articles in the library, a number of copies, as well as copies of the slide set here. So you can stop by the ZK library if you want a copy of the slide set.
Online?
I don't have them online.
Pardon me?
I don't have them online. They were made in England, so.
We'll just have to get paper copies.
We'll scan them in the original.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you very much, Bob. Is that better? Okay, so I have a microphone, but it's only going into the camera. Can you actually not hear me at all in the back? First of all, I'd like to thank Bob. He's brought all this to you, including setting up the hardware, organizing my whole trip, but pretty unique within DEC. He's actually accepting to pay for part of the trip, so he's putting his money where his mouth is, and considering the state of WSC right now, that little subsidy came in handy. I want to give you the hidden face of the moon, if you can see it at all. The DEC has been talking about ACE for a long time. And usually what DEC means is the Unix single market. And most of the DEC strategy that customers hear is ACE will bring you shrink-wrapped Unix. It'll bring you competing platforms that you can run the same software on. And ACE almost equals a new DEC Unix strategy. ACE was really invented by Microsoft, and they have something else in mind. And I would like to share with you today the other side of the ACE picture. It's the NT side, the Microsoft NT side. NT is really NT. It's being called now Windows NT, and this is proving that this is not just vaporware. It used to be called until August NTOS 2. So whatever the name is, remember that it's NT, and it's distinct from Windows NT and from NTOS 2 or NT anything else. The talk will be, I'd like to share two things, a little bit on the technical side. You guys are probably actually, I'm a little scared of this. You're probably all more technically aware than me. I just do ports, you know. Don't ask me too much about the internals, about the threads and that system call and how many times it calls the kernel. But I'll try to brief you in on the key technical points of NT as I've been able to see them. And that in some sense may be interesting to you, but it doesn't affect your job today. Then I'd like to share Microsoft's strategy for pushing NT, then contrast it maybe with what DEC is doing with NT, but remembering that Microsoft is driving this. And I will actually use Microsoft slides so that actually you can use you can see what Microsoft is saying as opposed to what I think of it. And when you see those slides, think of yourself as an IS manager for a small company with 100 PCs trying to figure out what you're going to buy next as your next server system. And then think about your job 3 years from now. This work, the NT work in the company, is now officially owned, I think, by PCSG and Pete Rose and that organization. Just for historical purposes, people should know that it was started by Don Galbatz, Chris Cuno, and myself in an office in March of '91, with Carl Stork, Paul Maritz, and Dave Cutler at Microsoft. And we've been working on this since last March. We have a team in place, and we've been already delivering 2 prototypes, one on 3Max here, and a Maxine prototype. These are not products by any stretch of the imagination. So it started out of Palo Alto and the Dom La Cava organization. And it started with a very limited scope, which is just to port to our machines. So that meshes perfectly with the people who have a grander scope to port to new architecture, which is a little bit more work. So there's a small team of about 6 engineers plus myself, plus half engineers taken from the hardware side who are doing NT porting. I'm leading them from Microsoft because I wanted to be in the source pool, okay, and commuting to Palo Alto once in a while. The outline of this talk is pretty simple. I'd like to give you my view of ACE. It's a moving target. If you read Demmer's mail, it's a fast-moving target. But it still exists, and I'll tell you what I think it's actually doing. And then I'll tell you what I think NT is, independently of Windows, independently of OS2, independently of the marketing hype. And I'll get a little bit in the technicals. How does it work from a software point of view? How does it work from a hardware and firmware point of view? There's a very interesting firmware aspect to NT, which people don't talk about, called the ARC spec, which people should keep in mind to understand the full picture. If at some point my voice goes down and the back can't hear, just raise your voice and wave, and I'll remember. All right, good. Then I'll give you a little bit of what happens when you migrate to NT for a customer running already a lot of DOS software. And then I'll give you the $1 million answer about what's going to happen to ACE and NT. Stick around. The problem with this slide is that it should actually be on a laptop where I can change the number all the time. It's a lot of things to a lot of people. It's a consortium without a corporate identity. Okay, it's called an initiative. The number of players growing daily. The real players are really the hardware players. And remember this, no matter what anybody says, the key player in ACE is Microsoft. From the NT, the official NT line is that NT is a migration strategy for high-end PC users. That is, you run your 486, you have your application, and you're tired of rebooting every other day because your Lotus application crashed your main critical application. So you're going to have a new, reliable Windows, and that's it. That's the Microsoft line. Just a high-end strategy for PCs. Also, you need a little bit more oomph than what the 486 can provide. You can get a MIPS machine. Sounds pretty tame as far as DEC's market is concerned, right? It's just high-end for PCs. From the Unix side, and I'm not going to talk too much about the Unix side. There are a lot of people who know a lot more than me about it. But the key line is this is a unification of the Unix market. It's a grand line. Unix is one operating system, right? It's all the same, all the Unixes of the world. You can never find two machines, even from the same manufacturer. I used to be on Stanford campus for a long time. I could not find two VAXs running the same version of the same operating system that actually had the same code running in kernel mode. Everybody hacked something in their version of Unix on the same OS version on the same VAX. Okay, it's actually the most varied operating system around in terms of installed base. So this is intended to unify it. That's all I will say on the Unix side. From a customer point of view, ACE is actually extremely simple. Forget what the manufacturers are saying. I got two choices where I used to have fewer. And they are supposedly orthogonal. Okay? If the ACE strategy works out like it should, these two choices are independent. I can now choose between a chip from Intel or I can choose a MIPS inside box. That's one decision I have to make. And I can go Windows NT or I can go Unix. And this is good because this is a market where consumers right now have not enough choice. Okay. At the end of the talk, I'll tell you what I really think ACE is. What is NT? Okay? You guys know that fellow? Let me see. Do I have a pen? Yeah. Let me rephrase this. Okay? It's Dave moving around a few blocks from DEC to Microsoft and telling Bill Gates that, just because you got a small machine doesn't mean you have to have 1/10 of an operating system on it. And it's nice if the user doesn't have to know that he's physically memory bound. It's nice if the power goes out and the power comes back and your file is still on the screen. It's nice if when you run many applications and one of them crashes, you can keep the other ones going. And it's also feasible. Just hire me. So, they classified this as their high-end operating system. Excuse me. And so they put it in, at the time, the official Microsoft high-end operating system strategy was called OS2. So they called it new technology under OS2, and they put it under the VP of high-end operating systems called Paul Maritz. And they kept developing it with that name. And then in August, they hit a snag with IBM. They had a bad night. They decided to get divorced. So they called it Windows NT. Did they change anything? Yes. They used a sed script. How many people do not know what a sed script is? Okay, they used, this is a Unix utility that takes a string and transforms it into another string. And it's like a batch editor, think of it that way. They warned everybody to stay out of the source pool for 28 hours because they do that on PCs. And they replaced the string OS2 by the empty string everywhere in the kernel. File names, variables, project directories, everything. And that's it. They changed nothing else. Okay, you will see that NT is intended to run with Windows on top, OS2 on top, POSIX on top, and in their official slides, ... Anything else you want. It was purely a business decision about packaging. Which higher level will they ship for a certain price? Which higher level will they not ship for a certain price, or will just ship for free to key customers you really need to buy? Okay? It's the same thing. Now, what are the features that this OS is supposed to deliver to Bill Gates? It's supposed to be portable. It's supposed to be reliable. Okay, portable, by the way, means basically 98% in C and cleanly architectured. Reliable means all the stuff I've described earlier. An app doesn't crash another. Power failure is not an excuse for a panic message. The system as a whole you can trust with an application that your business needs, the quote-unquote buzzword, the critical mission software. Okay. It's going to be C2 secure. That means that information access is protected. Okay, but not only this, it will be certified at a certain level of protection that the DoD calls C2. Okay, which is, to my knowledge, there may have been some version of EMS that at some point was certified for this. I do not know. But in terms of operating systems at large, this is the first OS that as a whole will be C2 certified. There's a small customer in the United States called the Armed Forces. And I see armed forces helicopters landing on Microsoft's campus on a regular basis. Okay, so I think they may have an interest. Also, I don't know if you know this, but in the American Armed Forces, most of the guides have been removed. Most of the guides about how to put together a weapon, I read this a few years ago. I think it was actually an interesting statement because we still won the Gulf War. But most of the guides about how to put together a gun, a rifle, take it apart, they actually scrapped all of it because it used English words. And instead, they replaced them with cartoons because they found they had a very strong literacy problem with most of their recruits. So they have cartoons explaining them how to put a gun together and a rifle together. And if you think about it, what's a graphical user interface? It's a cartoon where you used to have to say words. You just look at the picture, try to figure out what the little icon means, and press the button, and something happens. So it fits the strategy, okay, of assuming that your customer is illiterate. It also helps literate customers who don't want to remember 17 different sub-languages of 30 words each. Okay, so it's not just for the illiterate people. So anyway, they have a need for some of that stuff in the Army. It's going to have true multitasking. Okay, that is time sharing in the kernel level. This is, why is this new, you should ask me. I mean, we've had this for 20 years. You ever heard of TOPS 20? Okay, no. This is true multitasking for the PC world. Okay? You stop hugging the CPU when you do I/O, and if your quota is up, you give a turn to someone else. 32 queues and priorities and all that good stuff, because it's not the first time that Dave Cutler thinks about this. Something new, however, is this thing is going to be multiprocessor by design. From day one, NT is intended to support multiprocessors. It happens to also support uniprocessors as a degenerate case of a multiprocessor with the number of CPU constant equals 1. This is new. The assumption is symmetric multiprocessing hardware, by the way. Now, the key idea that I alluded to earlier is multi-OS interface. That is, Bill Gates is a modest man with a simple goal of 100% OS world market. Personally, I think he funds SCO so that he only has 98%, so with the extra 2%, he can go back to the FTC and says, I ain't a monopoly. Okay? So, the problem when you have that goal is humans get used to interfaces, programmers get used to APIs or system call lists, and it's really a pain to change. So, you can try to change them, or you can give them all they want on top of the same kernel. Now, this is not an idea that originated from Microsoft. As far as I know, it's not even an idea that originated in DEC. It's an idea that originated at Carnegie Mellon University with Mach. Okay? But they're commercializing it. And the final thing is, since this is also supposed to run on PCs, which, as we all know, are not real machines, right? That's good. DEC is changing. This statement would have been agreed to wildly a few years ago. So I'm glad it's changing. But anyway, PCs are still limited in power, and Gates is known for actually personally going to engineers who put out plans that say, I'm going to give you this feature, and this feature. It's just going to go 20% slower, and say, no. You got to be as fast as if you didn't have that feature. Now, reality creeps in, so he says, you got to be up to 2 to 3 to 5% as fast. They're not allowed to take a significant performance loss for anything you want to bring me. So they have the same performance bound. They actually do face-to-face comparison of things running on Windows NT and things running on single-user, single-tasking PCs, and he better be not any slower. Okay. So that's the key features. Now, if some of these features have shown up on some slides before that have been shown in this building, it's possible. Any questions so far? A lot of people. I'm glad. A little bit further in the details, so I am addressing people who know more than me about this. technically, they've tried to put together a compendium of all the good OS ideas they've seen, say, in the last 10 to 15 years. Or just actually some of them just pure software development ideas. First of all, it's object-based software methodology. That does not mean the thing is written in C++. It does mean that they have, in their specifications, the base concept is an object with methods. And in their implementation, they have one chunk of the operating system called the object manager, who gets requests for object creation, gives back handles, and even the modules themselves deal via this object manager. It's not just for the guys above. It's also for the guys in the kernel. Okay? Armed with this, they have very, very clean submodules. Originally, I've been hacking in the Unix world for a little bit, and I got to see the spec for NT, which they call the NT design workbook, which is 2 big black binders. And before I took the job, I scanned it and decided that from what I had seen, it was the cleanest designed or architected OS I had ever seen. Now, implementation has a way of making things dirtier. But nonetheless, it doesn't hurt if you start from a really clean architecture. So it sounded very, very attractive. And indeed, from what I've seen within the system, they are able to achieve this dream of architecture, which is that one guy really redesigns his entire submodule, comes out with a new version, and the others don't have to do anything about it. Okay, they really do abide by their specs, and people don't go through the back door in each other's code, and it's really well done. This is all still the NT part, okay? Cutler Head's the NT part. The Windows, the OS2, these are different groups, okay? And I'm not making any claims about the architecture there. Read my lips. So, a few other goodies that you get with clean architecture is you get recursive callability within the kernel. 5 years ago, I tried to open a file from within Unix. Okay, Berkeley Unix, not DEC Unix. BSD. Okay, I gave up. Ended up using buffers and having a process swap the data out of the kernel. So, security. How do they do security? They do it with access control lists on every single object. Some of you have seen this before. I hear some. Well, that's a possible coincidence, indeed. Another nifty little idea is multiple file systems. The guy who does the I/O architecture is a guy called Daryl Hevans. If you've been in DEC more than a few years, you may have heard his name. He used to do VAX training, VMS training. He's wrote a lot of stuff. The way he describes a file system is an abstract device driver. So if you can have different device drivers dealing with different devices at the same time in the system, and if you can load them dynamically, then this applies to file systems too. The first file system they're building is something called FAT. It's handy, 70 million installed base. Got to read that stuff. Besides, I traveled here with an RZ55 floppy in my bag. Okay, so I agree with reading FAT everywhere. They have a file system for HPFS for the guys that got, well, all right, I'm on video. For the people who bought OS2, they have ... Okay, the ... in particular is what they call the high reliability transaction-based file system. And that's one of their key added value things. Okay, I'm not going to say too much about it. It's the borderline of their confidentiality agreement. But the concept is, you bazooka the disk and install a new disk tomorrow, and you haven't lost anything. And that's real too. Why would you want that on a high-end PC? Got to think about that. They got file mapping. They even do addresses with 64 bits, so you can really write a long research report. And you just map that stuff in line, which is good, because most of the disk I/O bandwidth on PCs is not that tremendous these days. So, but then again, when you open a file, usually you don't read much of it, so that works. I think I alluded to earlier, they have dynamically loadable device drivers, not just in this spec, also here. Makes writing them easier too. They have power fail recovery. That may not be in product 1, but it's in the spec. If it's not in their product 1, that ships in 92, then it will be in product 2. And they have full-fledged processes, which means different address spaces and clean separation. And if process croaks, the whole system does not. If you need execution speed at the expense of debugging speed, you can also have lightweight threads all running within the same virtual address space and go crazy with 15 processes each walking on each other's memory, as you wish. Okay. How does it work from a software point of view? These are all a list of features, right? What's the cutup? The NT kernel is an overloaded word. It has two meanings. It's either the whole thing here, the main operating system plus the assembly code needed to get yourself off the CPU and start in life, minus the device driver, minus this box, which I will explain later, or it's just the actual minuscule assembly part needed to do just that, boot yourself up and handle traps. Okay, depending on the context, usually people think of it as the whole thing. Within the development group, they refer to the kernel as that little piece. That little piece on MIPS is written by Cutler himself. I ended up playing with it at some point because since we've been working on this since March, we've been following the development of NT at the same time that we were reporting. So some updates were needed, and on this machine, which is a 3MAX, DEC Station 5000 Model 200, when I needed to change some of the assembly, I didn't get it. And I used the LEDs on the back to tell me where I was, to trace bugs and stuff. I ended up writing my own macro to print a byte. I got 8 bits on these LEDs. And I couldn't figure out why that macro wasn't already in these like 50 pages of code. So I went to Cutler one day and I said, I don't understand. You wrote this piece. Why didn't you just leave around the macro you had to print out the stuff on the LED so you could debug your stuff? And his answer to me was, I wrote it correctly from the first time. Okay, so that's the kernel in a strict sense of the word. It's coded tight. Okay, the RTL move memory routine is long and it's optimized for almost every single case you can think of. Okay, I mean, there's some interesting consequences of that. If you change the width of your borders on your windows, and instead of using 2, 4, or 8 pixels, you use 3, then moving windows around, running them takes a lot longer. Okay, there are some consequences, but it's optimized tight. So anyway, at the bottom you got this operating system with all the operating system services in the executive. Some of the very, very lowest level trap handling get off the start at startup time in the kernel. Then you got this box, device drivers and the HAL. What's the HAL? It's what they call the hardware abstraction layer. This is how you build a new commodity market. Okay? This is the thing that allows them to work on x86s, on MIPS, maybe one day on Alpha, who knows, maybe on HP Precision Architecture, and if there's a new CEO at Sun, maybe on Spark. So this is a piece that abstracts the I/O architecture, the real skeleton of your machine, and makes it possible for the entire rest of the operating system, of the executive, to just say, HAL, get me a channel to that disk. HAL, start the DMA. HAL, tell me when it's done, without the rest of the executive knowing anything about that I/O architecture. And it's hard. Okay, I mean, all of you who actually know, I see someone in the back who I know does OS stuff. It's hard to get a HAL, to cut out a HAL out of an OS. Okay, and they're working on it. Today, it's not quite 100% there, but it's enough there that when the team in Palo Alto ported to Maxine from the 3MAX, which is actually from an I/O perspective a different machine, they actually ran the same kernel binary. just produced a different HAL, different device drivers. And they actually, it was a physical binary that I had running in Streamax that we bootlegged down to Palo Alto and put on the Maxine. Okay? So it's already very there, and it will be fully there by product 1. So you go up from there, and you got the NT system call interface specification, which Microsoft calls an NT application programming interface, an NT API. And on top of that, you got this MAC idea of either the Windows subsystem or the OS2 subsystem or the POSIX or ... so that applications on top can call their favorite system call list. So these processes run on user processes, makes it easier to debug. They can also coexist. Okay, you can potentially share data from one app and on one subsystem to another, right? DDE type. And there's no inherent limit to how many you can have on your system. So theoretically, at least, you have this universal operating system. And higher up, you have the applications. Now, usually the price you pay for a design like this is slowness. Right? Everybody's got to call the guy below, say, here's who I am, here's what I want to do it. Then the guy below says, here's who I am, here's what I want you to do it. And since these are protected layers, you have to copy data around, and there goes your performance. The way they're getting around that is with the concept of addresses which are qualified by a virtual address space name. So you never have to do copying. You can pass a fully qualified address. That is, I'm address 17 in virtual address number 34. And the concept of impersonation. That is, when the Windows subsystem gets a request from an app, he doesn't have to do any security checking. He just says, Bob asked me something. I'm Bob. I asked the kernel. That's it. So the security checking is centralized in one place. So you don't end up paying performance for that, and you end up having security bugs. The UK line means user mode, kernel line, kernel mode. And that's pretty much the picture. Any question on that picture? Okay. So that's the software view. What do you need in terms of firmware and hardware? You have your hardware, and then you have a firmware glue on it called ARC. I don't even know what it stands for anymore. I call it the barrier to entry to ACE. Okay, it's a humongous document that specifies all your firmware has got to do, and it's almost a full-fledged operating system. It's a heavy chunk of code. Okay, and this, remember this, if you sometime wonder why some machines are not running NT and are not on the market running NT. Okay, there's a significant amount of code that has to go there. I call it a code butterfly because it lives for about 17 seconds, right? You pay all these engineers to design all this system, then you push the reset button, ARC comes along, lets you set up which boot you want to boot from, and then dies. And you never hear from it again, right? So it's an expensive butterfly. But it's there, and it's there for two reasons. One, so they could actually have some assumptions in the operating system about what they're running on when they're booting. And two, it was a way to force all the hardware manufacturers to have a minimal set of hardware functionalities so that the application people could assume that at least there was something like sound, or there was something like a PC keyboard, or there was something like a VGA machine. So it's also, in some sense, a minimal specification of what the hardware vendor has to put on so that the application vendors have some set of assumption to start from. The ARC spec, by the way, effort was led by Microsoft, Compaq, DEC, a fellow called Randy Heap in WSC, and I think they might have had someone from MIPS, but remember, Compaq wrote the spec. They were the one keeping the minutes, and they were the one actually publishing the document. And unfortunately, I sat in some of these meetings, and they are convinced that you can only do a disk format standalone, okay, because that's the way DOS does it, and just the fact that other people do it differently doesn't prove it's feasible. They're also convinced that you have to do your installation and your firmware and your scanning of the hardware skeleton, of the I/O skeleton. It's kind of specifying what's around, also standalone. You can't do that later in the operating system. It just won't work. So there's a lot of stuff that ARC has to support, okay, and that we were never able to convince Compaq could be done after you booted the operating system. So that's the firmware hardware view. Okay. Let's pause just 1 second. So that's the technology, right? So now the Microsoft guy has two problems. He's got to go to his customers and tell them why they should do this. And then he's got to go to the ISVs, Lotus, Borland, all the other guys that write a fair amount of software and tell them why they should migrate to NT. Now, in the Microsoft view of the world, there's three kinds of people: customers, partners, and suppliers. Okay? I guess I'm on the record. So, customers you treat very, very, very well, like kings. You make sure they really have no pain. Partners you treat well until you don't need them anymore. Suppliers, you never treat them well. You try to put as many of them in competition, squeeze the last cent out of their price, okay, and make their life miserable. That's an exaggeration. So, what do they tell to the customers who happen to have DOS and Windows 3 binaries? It just runs. Take your floppy, stick it in the machine, press the name of the executable, press return, it just runs. Now, this sounds reasonable on an x86 machine running Windows NT. It's still the same architecture. Right? You just do emulation for all the thousands of DOS system calls. Now, it's a little trickier if you want to promise this on a MIPS machine. But you can do this if you send some heavy power big business types to Insignia and sign a license that says, I would like to not only be able to run SoftPC on my machine, but I would like to license your entire technology so I can embed it in the kernel so the customers never know that it's there. And, by the way, once I do that, I can also trap all the system calls that attack either Windows or the system, pass them to my native system, and run them really fast. So all that the user will end up doing in emulation mode is all the very complex arithmetic that you do in Lotus and stuff like add 1 and multiply by 2. Okay? So all the expensive stuff, which is painting these cute pictures and the buttons on the screen, will still be done native. So that's why it will just run. Now a little reality check too here. Does this run on this box today? No. Will it run by product 1? It's spec'd that way, and I'm convinced it will. Now, what about the guys who wrote software, the ISVs? These are partners as long as you need them. They've all ported to Win16, right? Windows 3, Win16-bit. What they're telling them is the Windows 32 is a superset of the Windows 16 interface. Just a superset. All the old stuff works. Okay, so things are 32 bits. And there's a few caveats that they're up front with, which is the APIs that dealt with something like expanded memory versus extended memory. That's gone. But then again, you got virtual memory. And the other thing they're telling them up front is, in the Windows 16, there is a way to share memory and transfer data from one application to the other, called DDE. And then there's a spec of how to do it, and there's a way to do it that way, or you can just flip a bit somewhere in the spec, and then you can just munch on each other's memory as you wish. This is how you get the UAE syndrome. Because, right, if I flip that bit and start stepping over your memory, right, how are you going to recover? So, that they've taken out. I think I've actually heard some of the discussion that took place there, but when someone tries to make Cutler believe that for compatibility reasons they should actually allow one app to crash another, they don't win. Okay, so that's history. The people that did not follow the Win16 spec for memory sharing will have to recode. So the theory, at least, is not that painful. Okay, they have to make it not that painful, at least in theory, because they have the FTC on their back with all the ISVs telling the FTC that Microsoft keeps changing the rules on them every 12 months and gives a 6 months lead to other people internally. So they have to look good. I think in practice, it will look as close to reality as feasible, because they have a team of people already going to key customers, doing the ports for them, and then reporting back to the engineers saying, that name was a bitch and you should make it the same as before. That routine didn't act the same as before and you should change it. So they have a strong human effort to ensure the compatibility in place at work today. So I think it will be a relatively easy migration. As an aside, I do not know if Digital has a set of people paid to go to key VMS customers trying to figure out what it takes and actually doing the port for them from 32-bit to 64-bit. If they don't, and someone in this building has the power to do something about it, I think it's a pretty nifty idea. If they do, all power to them. Okay. Now, I went to England, to London, a month ago to demo. It was the first time ever that a non-Microsoft machine was shown running NT in the world. And it was at Uniform London Open System Show, and there were a lot of salespeople there, a lot of people who have to make, whose living depends on making the right decision in their head about what they're going to push to their customers. So they really want to know what will happen to ACE and NT. And this was my answer. Okay? I have no way to predict the future. I've given you a lot of technical reasons why it should succeed. There are a lot of business reasons that could make it harder. Okay? I don't want to get into the political details, but IBM is pretty rich. Okay? The FTC is pretty powerful, and then there's a judge with a Macintosh lawsuit in the hands who has actually a fair amount of power in his hands too. So it's impossible, at least for me, to predict what's going to happen. But if DEC does the NT half as well as the other half, then at least the salesperson will have the full ACE choice. He doesn't have to say no because some deep strategic thinker thought for the customer and came up with a different answer. And that, I think, is a good position to be in. So that's why I picked the job of bringing NT to the MIPS stations. So that's the end of my technical talk. Before my first talk, at least mine, before I go into what Microsoft is telling its people, why don't we break for a few seconds and can handle some questions or whatever, or comments, insults, stones, eggs.
You described how NT is designed with processes and threads and all that good stuff. Is it designed to be a multi-user system and have all the appropriate protection against mutually hostile users on it, or is it still oriented to be a single-user system?
The answer to your other question is yes, multi-user. Now, Windows may or may not export that, but NT deep down assumes multiple users. It'd be actually, I mean, it's a good question, but it'd be actually hard to imagine Cutler designing a single-user system now. So, yeah, it's multi-user and stuff. Now, whether Windows today lets you attach many terminals to the machine or not, that I don't know, actually. Someone else asked me that question because it makes the business decision easier, and I don't know. But NT, definitely. Remember, it was intended as NT-OS2, which was intended to run on servers.
Is there a model within NT for how networking fits into this, or is that all sit above the NT?
No, there is a model within NT. There is something called the NDIS interface, which apparently has been in the LAN manager world for a little bit of time already. It's an interface between network-type devices and network protocol stacks. For business reason, they will embed NT LAN manager, client and server, in it. That works already. Doesn't work on this machine because that's a November 13 build. It works in the building today in Seattle, in Redmond. It has to because they're now self-hosted on NT. So that was a little painful in August when they decided to do that, but it now works. And they have a committed TCP IP stack work going in there. I do not know if it's committed for product one or not externally. but they're working on it. The PCSG has negotiated and is working on bringing the DECnet stack to NT. I happen to know for a fact that Novell got enough information to port their stack. I think they understand that in the market they want to reach, they have to be open to any network. Now, whether that will end up being the most efficient network on the planet, I don't know. I don't think necessarily it will be the case. Now, but from an IS manager point of view, if salesmen come in and says, look, anything you can plug into this, just plug it in, it'll work. I do not know if I would personally ask for performance measures.
I assume with ARC, the intent was to overcome the experience of the PC BIOS, where even though it existed, things like OS2 couldn't really use it because it couldn't run cleanly, except in 16-bit mode. Was that truly a design objective of ARC to be runnable with full protection turned on?
I think so. I've never seen that list, but it seems to achieve that goal, so I would think it's probably not by accident.
You mentioned multiprocessing as a capability. Briefly, how and when?
Multiprocessing or multiprocessor?
I thought I saw you say
There's both.
Both, right.
Right. Well, multiprocessor is being coded in and designed at the same time. It's the same source pool. Okay, and they have a multiprocessor machine on which they're doing testing already. Okay. So that will be, I'm assuming that multiprocessor support will come out on day one. I mean, it's not easy to introduce a new operating system in this world, right? So you got to have some really convincing arguments by the time you come out, and I think multiprocessor by design is a very strong one for a lot of people. Now, multiprocessing, was your question multiprocessor or multiprocessing? Okay, well, multiprocessing is in there. I mean, they got different processes and they're all time sharing and they all block when they do I/O and all the cute stuff. That's before day one. I mean, it's already there. I think the multiprocessor stuff, despite the fact that it will be there, will take a while to shake out because the amount, I mean, they have a humongous testing team, but all these people are doing single processor machines. So I think the amount of bashing of the system is 2 orders of magnitude higher on the uniprocessor systems. So they will have to shake out bugs later. So I think there will be a credibility building period and a shakeout building period on the multiprocessor side, which may take some time, especially since these are customers who are likely to take their time before jumping on a bandwagon. But I think it's got a really good chance because it's there by design from day one. It's being coded in simultaneously with the rest of the OS, and it's being debugged at some speed simultaneously as well.
In the ARC spec, is there actually a pointer of some kind to retrieving that specification for review, as well as any information on the NT operating system itself?
Okay. For the ARC spec, there might be an official pointer somewhere in the company. There should be. I can give you an unofficial pointer that might work for a few more days, or maybe a little longer, who knows, called Randy Heap, H-E-A-P. I hope he's not going to hate me for giving out his email to 1,000 people, and he's on DECWise, D-E-C-W-S-C, : and he was one of the writers. If there's a copy stored somewhere, you might know. Otherwise, I would go through any official ACE support. I mean, there's got to be an ACE program manager somewhere in the company, right? And if that doesn't exist, call Galbas Organization. They have a stake in ACE, and there's someone who will know. As for NT information, I've been gearing up. Used to do it myself, and I hired one person, and that person is starting to hire people. Let's see. There's an official, marketing person on the group who's taken on NT and who is distributing information, at least public NT information, and that's Michel Gambier, Gambier, and I think he's on the same node, and he should be able to get you some public NT information. You can get a fair amount of propaganda straight from Microsoft. The Windows 32 API is actually available online for free to anybody in the world on CompuServe somewhere. Okay. It's a very cheap channel from Microsoft. Just post it. There's a huge tree there. And again, if you call Michel Gambier and ask about that information, they will be able to give you the pointer to that tree. It's also available on the internet somewhere. You can FTP anonymous. The machine is DEC WSE, : The person's last name is Gambier, G-A-M, like mummy, B-I-E-R. If that fails, get me. But my email stack grows quickly these days. Yeah, there's a Windows NT conference, actually. I forgot because I don't have time to read it. But there's a Windows NT conference, and it's Windows _NT. It's managed by Ben Schreiber and PCSG, and you might actually find a lot of that there. Try there first. Good point, thanks. No, I don't know what node, but it's probably in the node file. In the node file, there's actually one message advertising that. And I can write to myself that to make sure that gets in the node file. I'll try to remember that. Windows NT. DEC, correct. So, yeah.
Is NT POSIX compliant?
Yes. Okay. Now, what is NT compliant? Remind me if I don't write it in at the end. Okay. They have someone working part-time on implementing POSIX 10.03.1, but it's intended as a check-off pass method, not as a full POSIX support that's actually usable by people. Okay. So it's because there are a lot of contracts. It's like Unix, right? There are a lot of people these days in departments. There's POSIX, and a lot of people, I think, who buy VMS machine and who make sure that there's POSIX on it so they can buy it and then run VMS. Okay, so I think it's intended the same concept. I've heard rumors of, them contracting out to someone else to get a true, full-fledged POSIX subsystem that's actually usable, and that would sound like a very rational business move for them to do. Try louder.
Real-time capabilities in NT?
Not an objective. Okay.
Part of, if they do POSIX compliance, it's 10.03.4, which is the real-time extension. So that has to be contracted for it to get in there.
Well, that'd have to be harder than contracted. I mean, you got a kernel down there which is doing time sharing with 32 priorities. Okay, now you want to do deadline scheduling, saying, look, my missile tracking system better get back to this within 17 milliseconds. Okay. Well, there's preempting based on token and your priority, but I mean, you could probably, there are what they call the real-time priorities, the upper 16, where I think you don't get. Okay, where you can lodge one process up there and make sure he doesn't get interrupted, but. Okay, so now you're tracking one missile, and then your fuel goes down. So. Okay, now it's 2:00. This is most of the demo. Okay, it shows you this will crash any Windows running on DOS. If you bring 3 waves on the screen, they don't know how to timeshare that well. I'd like to share with you, if I can get your attention in your sitting position for a little bit longer, to show you some of what Microsoft is saying, with Microsoft's permission, about why people should move to Windows NT. And this is, let's give credit where credit is due. This is a slide from Carl Stork. If you look closely, this is the Macintosh Jaggies. But anyway, that's a joke. He's in charge of developing Windows NT business. He's also in charge of hosting the OEMs. I'm an OEM there. My email there is O-something, which is officially for OEM something, or more practically outsider something. And he hosts his key OEMs, and I'm happy to report that DEC is a key OEM. I'm unhappy to report that we're not the only one there. For sure, Compaq is there, very heavy, and they were there before us. And that's all I'll say for now. So, this is Carl Storks, and he goes around the world preaching Windows, and especially Windows NT. So that's his first slide. Okay. And these are sold copies. Now, he's not saying for how much he sold them. And he's not saying how many people are actually using these copies that they got for free when they bought their laptop. But, so at first when I looked at this slide, I was also completely taken. Okay, this is it. This is the end of the world. Everybody's going to be in Windows by next month. You better jump on it too. But, okay, you got to sit back a little bit and say, okay, yeah, a lot of these are given out for really cheap. A lot of people are getting this for free. I mean, there's one guy who wrote a letter to the editor in some of the PC rags that said, yeah, you guys are advertising 7 million Windows sold, but every time I buy a new piece of something, I get a free Windows, so I got 4 of them sitting on my shelf. And for my real work, I use DOS. Okay, so it's the marketing view of the world. Okay, remember that for the rest of this talk. But nonetheless, it's still based on reality. Not everybody is buying Windows as shelfware. Okay, cut it in two. Okay, if you were an ISV doing a business plan, say, okay, so just cut it in two. It's still 3.5 million by November. It might be 5 million by today. Okay, it's a reasonable install base to build a business plan on. Listen, let me plug a friend here. Whoever talks to Bob Conti here and wants to hear his strategy for SDT and all, listen to him. He's got that much figured out right. I think DEC spent a fair amount of money paying ISVs to port to our MEPS line. And the last time I read the ISV list, I think after 2.5 years of effort, we got to 2,000. Okay? This is a number as of November 91. Remember that NT is supposed to be a product in second half of 92. Extrapolate as you wish. Now, I don't know if they count the guy who wrote the checkbook program on Windows Basic at home as one of the applications. But either way, it's hard to find an ISV today in the real world where, this excludes academics, okay, where they don't have a strong Windows porting plan. Now, who are they going to sell this to? They want Windows as a universal interface, from notebooks to servers. Okay? And what they say is, depending on the CPU that you have, the amount of memory that you have, and the amount of money that you have, you will either run Windows 32 on top of DOS, where you'll have the same API but reduced functionality, or you will run Windows 32 on top of NT, where you'll have the same API and increased functionality. Now, if you look closely at the higher end, it's kind of vague. Server and multiprocessors. That's because they also use this slide when they talk to DEC. Okay? So they can't up front say, we're going to eat your market. But if it runs on a multiprocessor and a server, right, they didn't build, there's a bigger box here that says, mainframe or company-wide servers. And if the networking holds together, then they have pretty much, not quite, the concept of a cluster, okay? And I don't see them saying, no, I can't sell it to you, you're just too big a deal. Okay? So if the thing really runs, and the thing has good multiprocessor support, okay, this line here could get extended pretty far. Also, what's almost scary is they say that Windows 32 on DOS will be for the notebook. But I have a friend who just bought a notebook months ago, and it's got a 386 in it, with up to 10 megabytes of memory. Okay, the spec for NT is a 386 with 8 megabytes of memory. Now, granted, that doesn't go very fast. Okay, I mean, once you put virtual memory and graphics and GUI, you're really better off with 16 meg. And when I told them here what I wanted, I told them, well, 16 is good enough to show something running, but I'd really love 24. But if you look at the price of memory and extrapolate that 1 or 2 years out, okay, then it becomes purely a pricing issue. They sell Windows 32 on DOS for $10 and Windows 32 on NT for $1,000. They're going to keep people out of the market. But it's completely within their control. That, to me, is the scariest slide in their strategy from DEC's point of view. Now, the good news is at the corporate level, I mean, that was a scary slide until about a couple of months ago, and now it sounds a little bit better because at the corporate level now we're supposedly in bed together and doing deals together and working together. But still, right. We've moved out. Good, I got people who are listening here. It's great. Okay, so their keyword, by the way, is evolutionary, which means your old apps still work and you still understand what you got in front of you if you understood what you had before. They want to extend Windows to every device, but this slide is actually way too confusing for what it says. Okay, they have a group at Microsoft who thinks that every machine that has a human interface should run Windows. It goes from your wristwatch to your mainframe, to your fax machine, to your photocopier, to your telephone. If it's got, I mean, we all got fancy telephones. I don't use more than 2% of the features of that stuff because I don't want to pull out the sheet that tells me how to do, escape control like Alt-Z to actually transfer the call. So I say, look, I'll try, right? And then there's call parking, and then there's call forwarding, and no, I don't do it. Okay, and maybe I'm dumb and also I don't have the time to go into it, but maybe there are other people in that same position who don't use most of the capabilities of the machines they already have today because this human interface is a pain. So they're saying we want Windows as a universal human interface on every machine that a human uses. They may not get there, but if you think about that market, that makes the computer market look like a niche market. Okay, then there's stuff on Windows 3.1. I don't know anything about it, so I'm not going to tell it to you. That's their intermediate release. I don't know what they're going to put on there. Okay, this is a summary of where they think Windows NT will ship. Okay, at which level in the line do you buy into the NT stuff? But personally, if I can't afford it, I'd rather have an OS that doesn't crash too, even if I'm just on the desktop. So that to me is a picture today. I think that gray box is only likely to extend. This is a summary of why you should go Windows and buy the NT stuff. This is what I told earlier about the customer. What are they going to tell them to get them to switch to the NT side of Windows, assuming they've already made the switch to Windows. It's open-ended on the way up in terms of features, in terms of hardware support. And you don't have to hire a new person in your IS department who has long hair, works odd hours, and speaks a language you don't understand. Okay. When I was at the show in London, I had some customers. It's really nice because I was limited to the amount of stuff that I was allowed to say since I was part of a marketing team and a sales team, and they had Unix demonstrated next door and on the same platform. And so some customers came to me and said, is this a Unix replacement? I said, no, it's for a different market. It's Unix is for the people who need very fast or some special applications that run on Unix. This is just for the people who want better Windows. And I say, okay, tell me more about it. Does it have this? Does it have that? Yes. Does it have this? Yes. This is a Unix replacement. Okay. So there are some customers who believe it. I'm not claiming it's true. I'm not claiming it's false. Okay. I'm saying there are some customers who believe it. Okay, there's his view of the structure, but that's very similar, except his slide doesn't have OS2 anymore. I don't know why. It's compatible with Windows and DOS. They have some information for the people who are actually building apps as to why this is a good 32-bit API to move to. I don't build applications, so I don't get into this. I think the competition for APIs to me, is completely driven by the market share.
Windows has struggled
16 to 32 bits, and we're on the doorstep of moving from 32 to 64, so what's going to happen? Have they given any thought to 64 bits?
I do not know. The NT, they don't share all their thoughts with me, so I can tell you they haven't shared any thought about 64-bit with me. The NT kernel at this point is really a 32-bit stuff, okay? But it's running on the MIPS R4000, and there is the MIPS 2 architecture, right? So they might eventually evolve it into 64-bit. I think for their market, honestly, I think they don't currently have a 64-bit strategy. They'll be happy enough to capture the 32-bit market for now. If you look at the PC distribution, and 86s, 286s, 386s, 486s, 586s, okay. There's already, in terms of proportion, the 32-bit market is not that big. Now, you go to departmental servers, people buying compacts and that type of stuff, then you got a lot of 32 bits. So, as far as I know, no, there is an edge in going to 64-bit that they don't have.
Done as far as dealing with NT and porting it, do you see anything in it that is intrinsically 32-bit, or is it reasonably general as far as the sources and so on that it could be extended to a 64-bit?
It's a really hard question. I mean, can I guarantee you that there's no code in the system that really assumes that there's 4 bytes in that word is going to take advantage of that? No, that's not true. I've actually bumped into someone who actually did something weird like this, and then they changed the spec and used different bytes, and they had assumption about the bytes. But so is it going to be that easy? Is there something intrinsic that says the world is 32-bit? No, I don't think so. Now, are people coding to 32-bit, and are there a lot of assumptions that are coded in that your maximum number of somethings, you got 8 minor device numbers and that's it, that type of stuff, then yeah, maybe there are some. I don't think they would be architectural. They might be implementational. I don't see any architectural limit that says it's 32-bit world. In fact, their 64-bit file addresses already prove that in some areas they're willing to use that. Now, that doesn't say, on the other hand, that I've seen, if-def for 64-bit in the code. Besides, I'm not allowed to talk about what I see in the code. But no, the answer is no in either way. That is, I haven't seen a strategy to move to 64, and I've never seen anything intrinsic that would prevent it. But it's hard work. I mean, to port to a different number of bits, just for some reason, despite high-level languages, it always ends up being a pain. So anyway, the technical aspects of 32-bit API are, as far as I'm concerned, not important. I mean, I hate to say this, but in the computer market as a whole, the technical capability of what you have, of what you're buying, seems to have had very little impact on the market that object is getting, right? I mean, Intel versus Motorola, DOS versus anything else in the world, right? It seems that the technical capabilities of something are not what decide its future. The things that decide their future are things like toolkits available now. Okay, they shipped their NT pre-release developer kit for x86 at the end of October, I believe, to select fews that they chose. They froze their MIPS PDK a few days before Christmas. They're also making that available to select few. Sometime during next year, you will see, send in X $100 and you'll get your own Windows 32 PDK. So I think that puts them in good shape. They're promising delivery 1992 and eventually also on top of DOS, a little later. Now, the key point, as I said earlier, is not the technological aspect of the Windows 32 API, but the business aspect. Okay? The idea is, as an ISV now, you're getting an incredible market base, but which you also get by building your stuff to DOS, which means building your operating system inside your application. And they're getting the future to the high end. So I think from a business point of view, that's their best story when they go to ISVs. Okay, and then they're telling them things will get better with time, but everybody says that. Okay. And then they're telling them the Microsoft equivalent of all hands on deck, or all the wood behind one arrow. Like basically Microsoft equals Windows. I don't know if they show that at the IBM meetings, but they show that to everyone else. So it's saying, at least with us, you may not like what we're doing, but at least you can rely on us. Tongue in cheek. Okay. First of all, thank you for staying seated so long. Second, more questions, or I can give you a small tour of this, but well, this is actually not that impressive, except for the part that it runs and it looks like your PC.
Are they on schedule for shipping this year?
I think they will ship in 1992. I think so far they've met all their committed schedules. They said they would have, the PDK out by the end of 91. They did. I think, personally, as an engineering manager, Cutler is an incredibly impressive person. He's got his style, but he gets things done, and his workers perform. So he delivers. So I think, personally, my guess is I'm counting on yes.
How many people on the development team?
Oh, I can't share exact numbers. First of all, because I don't know the exact numbers. But I can tell you that from my feelings is that they have one tester for every two developers. And I can only give you a range. I would say there's more than 100 people total, and there's less than 500. Engineering.
The advent of Windows NT being ported to RISC platforms, what's the view out in Redmond of X in general and client-server architecture? Here you have two juggernauts here. You have X in a client-server architecture, and you have Windows now being ported over to a RISC box. Where do they meet? What's Microsoft's
There's a
view?
quip answer, and then there's a business answer. The quip answer is what's X. The business answer is they understand there is X, and they want Windows to win. Bob.
Do you have any comments on competitive moves that VMS might make or Unix might make to, against versus NT or whatever? Instances or whatever.
First of all, I'm in a position in the company where nobody ever asked me my advice. Okay, I'm just porting kernels. Second, I think people have to realize I think actually the honest answer is from the people I've talked to back in Maynard previously in this week and stuff. To my great surprise, they actually understand all this. My answer to one of the guys I was meeting was actually I could walk out now. You understand everything I wanted you to understand. I'm just very surprised about it and very happy to hear this. So I think the fact that you're seeing a corporate wedding between Microsoft and DEC shows that actually a lot of people at the higher levels this time really understand what's happening. In terms of VMS and Unix, I think just as a hedge project, wouldn't hurt to have a Windows interface running on your stuff. Never know. If you got a spare few people and you have time to pull out the Windows 32 spec somewhere. Personally, I think it'd be a reasonable business move. Just in case. What else? In terms of Unix, I mean, they've got to convince customers that that there is shrink wrap software at some point. Otherwise, I think it's going to become very hard. I mean, there's time. This is not a danger today. They don't have a product today, and then even after they have a product, they have a credibility curve to climb. But my guess is 3 years from now, if someone doesn't come up with a pretty standard interface and it's very strong software availability, they're going to have a difficult time selling. So to your answer, it'd be the Windows interface and as shrink wrapped as you can. Shrink wrapped. Right.
When do you think we'll see base levels of Windows NT that we can actually start using risk
On our
cars?
machine or on someone else's machine?
On risk cars.
Well, you can. The first one who will come out with a MIPS box running NT is MIPS. Okay, MIPS has a machine, and the history of that machine is confidential.
Well, what I'm saying is, I mean, you've done the port.
Right, I've done a port to a machine, okay, without, and we're now putting product plans together, okay. We're porting also to Maxine, and that's actually the first product that's supposed to come out.
When do we see Max?
It's very, very hard to answer that question when 2 days ago 100 people from a group of 145 are being transferred from Palo Alto to Massachusetts. So I won't comment on any schedule. I can't make any commitment today. I'm working organizational issues. The people in the organization are committed to NT. That's why the NT team is not one of the 10. It's not one of the group that's being asked to move back to Maynard. And I have their ear, and I think they all understand it's very critical. But to commit to a schedule now, I wouldn't be able to necessarily deliver. Heck, you're a software group. Just because I happen to belong to a hardware group doesn't mean I have to just preach you buy my hardware. Okay? Let's be honest. You can buy MIPS hardware that will run NT from a competitor. Okay, you can buy it from MIPS. The reason you can buy it from MIPS is because they're not using their own design. Well, the design, fact is, whatever the reasons are, okay, they will be the first in the market with a MIPS machine that runs NT. And if you don't want to wait till DEC hardware engineering gets their act together, buy it from a competitor. That should happen sometime, basically by the day that Microsoft ships NT as a product one, the hardware will be there and ready.
Is the distribution strategy or the packaging format for Windows applications out a couple of years on RISC machines going to be binary compatibility only, or is there going to be some intermediate distribution format that allows shrink-wrap software to run on more than one platform? And if the answer is binary compatible only, then is there any reason in the future for a non-MIPS RISC box running Windows NT?
There are a lot of questions here. First of all, before I answer them, let me comment on the previous statement I made. If DEC hardware engineering happens to build a MIPS platform that runs NT in the same time frame, please buy ours first. Okay? But if we don't, do your business thing. Now, your question, my understanding is it will be binary level compatibility. Okay, and nothing fancier. Now, there's nothing that prevents you from potentially selling in the same CD-ROM an x86 binary and an NT binary and not telling it to your customer. So you actually say, this is it. Want NT, just buy the NT version of it. You have two binaries, and your system figures out at install time which one it wants to suck up. Okay, so you can hide a lot of the actually difference that way. Now, the second question is there any future for a non-MIPS architecture running Windows NT? Right?
Given that it's binary format.
It's different. Well, first of all, I want my job, right? Now, there's another people. Demmer has said that NT will run on alpha. Okay, so is there any future to it? A lot of people who believe so. Now, I don't see why not. Even honestly, not just because I'm trying to not be fired on the way out of here, I don't see why not. Because if you can put an x86 and a MIPS binary in the CD-ROM, you can also put an alpha binary there.
But what we always get back is, okay, the port doesn't cost that much, but it's going to cost me $500,000 to validate that it really runs on your machine. If you don't have, at least 1 billion units out there already, it's not worth my time to go with.
Now you're telling me that as if you put on the shoes of the guy who's trying to sell the alpha architecture running NT to an ISV, he might hear this?
Absolutely.
Yes, he might. He's got a selling job to do. And this is when other considerations come in, like how much do I need to pay you to do it? There's all kind of possibilities. There's also, ours will be tremendously faster. So we're digital and everyone buys from us because we're digital, so do it. There's all kind of, but yeah, it's a job. They can hear, why should I do it for you? But that's true for any OS and any architecture. You get a job selling to the ISVs. I think there is, is there a future market for it? I wouldn't assume no. I would go for it and try it. Any people who know the answer is the consumers anyway.
mention of clusters. What kinds of cluster-like features are they planning for in high availability?
The only thing that would be approaching some of the high availability stuff would be their transaction-based file system. I don't see any other, reasonably high availability, serious high availability stuff. In the clusters, if I remember correctly, you can have a cluster of 5 axes, take a bazooka, blow one out, and then 5 or 7 seconds later, all the secretaries continue typing in the same process, that they were on, and they don't realize it's been migrated to a different platform. I think that was possible. But personally, if my process goes away but my file stays, it's already right there. It's not equal to cluster functionality. That's true. It's much less. Yes, this is, they don't have yet the very high end. That's perfectly true. Well, see, the connection that they have into the cluster is not really a cluster. That was a misnomer, an error on my part. I apologize. They can have networked machines who all exchange files and all can view each other's file systems via a LAN manager or something like this. So it's not tightly coupled, and there's no notion of heterogeneous versus homogeneous. They're not going to pass a piece of a process to each other, but they can view each other's directories and net use d::boom, and there you are. So it's not the same thing. I'm not saying that an average bank is going to jump and buy 4 386s and hook him up with NT and say, we got it. But on the other hand, there was an interesting TP number that came out of a bunch of compact multiprocessor 486 machine, I think 6 or 7 months ago. I think they held the record for a few weeks or something. I don't know. So I wouldn't laugh him out, 2 years down the road. Okay, what can I show you here? Looks just like Windows. You don't need to know how to use a keyboard. You got all your standard graphics apps. You got your DOS command window, and you can do a directory. Just like on DOS. This is, and the waves don't stop when you do that. And then you can use, I can demonstrate the multi-thread business, quantify some of this business, because that I think is very, very new. I think there are a lot of people, ISVs, who went to Unix because they needed threads-like capability to respond in real time. Here they are, all sharing the same virtual address space, stepping on each other happily. What else can I show you? I can show you the biggest business application running in the world today. No, I can't. Because I just hung the system. So it's reliable. Well, we'll find out how fast it boots. We'll find out if it cleans up its file system or not. This was not planned. Handy button in the back. Now we're back at the firmware. So now you get to see how fast it boots. Boot 7 NT 32 megs memory. Again, remember this is a November 13 build. This is not even what they released as a PDK2. So this is a month before.
Which hardware is
this is a DECstation 5000 Model 200, courtesy of our great naming strategist, also known as a 3MAX. It's R3025 megahertz.
And
Today there will not be x86. There is no x86 binary that runs today. Now it's taking 60 seconds here doing nothing, right? It's actually, so don't count that as part of the NT booting time. NT is normally run in the development system with an attached PC running OS2. Okay, that serves the debugging port and a kernel interface. This thing has been hacked by my team to spend 60 seconds trying to talk to the PC on the serial line, then decide it doesn't exist and proceed. So here you go. And there you are. It just auto-checked an RZ55 on the way too. Now here is my big business app. Here we go. The answer to Americans' productivity problems right there. Okay. And here's my favorite part. That you have to win to get this, but Cutler put that in himself. I don't know.
Did you rewrite the graphic card driver backend for this hardware? Or?
One guy in the team wrote a graphics driver for the Windows, yeah. It's not optimized, okay? The idea was to emulate what was already running as best as quickly as possible. I'm not even going to share the timing of this with you, but let me tell you this way. Most of the drivers were written in a 4-week period between the time that the compiler started working again for me after they broke it for a month and a half and the London show. Gives you an idea. So most of it is the worst speed you'll ever see on any one machine. Let's get it to work at any cost. Drivers. Okay. That concludes my talk. I'll take some questions offline. Thank you very much.